Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? How's everyone feeling? Good, good. Thank you for being here tonight. So my name is Betty Cruz, and I'm the president and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. We are celebrating 95 years of the World Affairs Council this year. Thank you. When our work began in 1931, it was about bringing our community together to talk about the most pressing global issues of our time. And many of the challenges and opportunities that we were grappling with then as a society, both domestically and internationally, still seem quite familiar today. These challenges especially feel more constrained than ever. This is why we recently launched Civic Futures, a year-long series exploring how democratic societies endure in a time of global pressure and domestic division. Through global perspectives and local dialogue, like you're all here for tonight, the series brings together experts and community members to examine the forces shaping democracy and the role we all play in sustaining it. And today's topic, the economic impact of immigration policy, is one that continues to be essential to the fabric of our nation and our world. Tonight's conversation is hosted in partnership with Fragomen, the largest immigration-only law firm in the world, and made possible in part thanks to support from the Heinz Endowments. Now it's my pleasure to invite Encore Sakaria, Policy Manager to the City of Pittsburgh, Mayor Corey O'Connor, to offer welcoming remarks on behalf of the Mayor. Encore.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome. First, thank you to the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh, celebrating a remarkable 95 years of convening conversations like this that really matter, and to Fragomen for their generous partnership tonight. And a very warm welcome to our panelists, of course, Allegheny County Executive Sara Innamorato, Rich Andre of the American Immigration Council, Ana Maria Meiles of Fragomen, and Gus Faucher of PNC Financial Services. We are fortunate to have you here today. And if I may, I want to take a moment here before we begin to acknowledge something particularly meaningful and I think will contextualize this conversation. Rich was a driver behind the New Americans in Pittsburgh reports over the last few years, research that was conducted in partnership with the City of Pittsburgh and Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. When Rich speaks in just a moment about the economic contributions of immigrants and refugees, he's not speaking in the abstract. He is instead speaking about our neighbors, our colleagues, and our communities, backed by data that the city uses to this day because we believe those numbers matter and because we believe the story they tell and what you will hear in just a moment deserves to be heard. Indeed, tonight is representative of a consequential moment, one that's being felt right here in Pittsburgh in ways both urgent and deeply personal. That's because Pittsburgh has never been a city that sits on the sidelines. We have always been a city built by people who came from someplace else, who brought their hands, their minds, their families, and their dreams. That story is not the past, but what is happening right now. Consider this. Between 2014 and 2019, Pittsburgh's overall population declined, but our immigrant population grew by nearly 19%. Without that growth, our total population loss would have been doubly as steep. Immigrants and refugees to this end are not just part of Pittsburgh's story, they're the reason why Pittsburgh still has a story to tell. In a single year, immigrants in Allegheny County held $730 million in spending power, paid over $200 million in federal taxes, and contributed nearly $100 million in state and local taxes. In the Pittsburgh metro area, there are over 3,700 immigrant entrepreneurs, and immigrants are 26% more likely to start a business than US-born individuals. Statewide, immigrants now contribute about $4.5 billion in state and local taxes and hold $34.2 billion in spending power. That is simply not charity, that is economic power. And look at our universities. They host over 14,000 international students each year. And in a single academic year, those students at CMU, at Pitt, at Duquesne support 5,500 jobs and contribute $500 million to Pittsburgh's economy. These are obviously not small numbers. These are the numbers of a city that works because people came here and chose to build their lives alongside us. And Pittsburgh has been deliberate in saying, as is the county, that they belong here. Pittsburgh is a certified welcoming city, a designation that reflects the hard work of people in this room and real policy commitments, not just rhetoric. The city established its Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs to connect newcomers with resources and ensure that immigrant and refugee voices are present where decisions are made. But I want to be honest with you tonight. Commitments require renewal. The policy environment globally here is ever shifting and creates real uncertainty for real people, people who are teaching in our universities, treating patients in our hospitals, opening businesses on our streets, and raising families in our neighborhoods. What cities say and do in this moment matters. The signals we send through our policies, our budgets, our words, and our present at events like this one indicate whether Pittsburgh is a city that is open or a city that is closing. I think everyone up here would agree that we are here tonight because we believe Pittsburgh should remain open, not just because it's the right thing to do, though it is, but because the evidence is unambiguous. Our economic vitality, our population growth, our capacity to lead, all of it is bound by our ability to attract, to welcome, and retain immigrants and refugees. So we are so fortunate here to have such a esteemed panel before us to help us all navigate this moment. So please join me in welcoming them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Encore. I have to say there's also a really nice coming together moment, really appreciating Encore's remarks, the work that he is now leading in the Office of Immigrant Affairs. There's a history here. My great pleasure to have gotten the opportunity to work with Rich and with Ana Maria in the past when I was able to serve in the city in the initial formation of what was then Welcoming Pittsburgh, which has evolved, and we were just talking earlier about the direction and the many hopes and aspirations for this work on the path ahead. So grateful to see also many of you who have been involved in the work along the way, thinking about immigrant inclusion as a whole broadly, as well as, as we're gathered here tonight to think about the intersection in terms of the economic impact that immigrants are making. Now, to facilitate tonight's conversation, I get to turn it over to your moderator, Ana Maria Meiles. Ana Maria is part of the team at Fragomen, where she provides counsel to domestic and multinational corporations on a wide range of immigration matters, including investment and employment migration, federal compliance, global outbound immigration, and federal litigation. Her clients span diverse industries such as chemicals, manufacturing, healthcare, education, financial services, technology, and steel. Drawing from her own personal experience as an immigrant from Colombia, Ana Maria is deeply committed to supporting both immigrants and their employers. She has extensive experience advising on various visa categories. She holds unique litigation experience, including representing clients in immigration-related federal court cases, and her practice extends to appearances before multiple U.S. agencies, including the Department of Labor, Department of State, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Earlier in her career, she gained valuable experiences as a legislative programs officer at the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C., a legal fellow at the Center for Justice and International Law, and a fellow at UNESCO in Paris. It's my pleasure to turn it over and ask you to please join me in welcoming Ana Maria, who will begin tonight's conversation.
Good evening, all, and thank you, Betty, for your kind introduction, and most importantly, for bringing together this wonderful group of experts and for all of you to participate in this very important conversation. I'm honored to be moderating the event today and excited to hear everybody's perspective. But before we jump into the conversation, I'd like to provide a framework for our discussion today by reviewing important changes in immigration policy that have happened since January of 2025. Now, please, we're not going to have time to go through everything. We're not even going to get into the details of anything. I just want to provide a very general set of introduction to current and future proposals of policy changes that have either resulted in work authorization or visa restrictions, travel limitations, and increased enforcement activities. So we'll start with the administration seeking to suspend temporary protected status, humanitarian parole, and other humanitarian immigration programs along with their corresponding work authorizations. Though through a number of court challenges, some of the terminations have not happened, and some visa authorizations and work authorizations have been extended. Most of the programs are currently suspended or on their way for being suspended. Now, a lot of these things are still open to court challenges, but it's a wait and see at this point. There's also the suspension of the refugee program, the suspension of the asylum program at the border, an earlier suspension of affirmative asylum programs. Those are asylum programs that for which they apply, asylees apply while they're in the United States, though there has been a partial lift to this suspension as of March of 2026 for applicants who are not part of the hold for high-risk countries. There are also more restrictions on employment authorizations that limit the continuity of work for foreign nationals in the affected categories. Things like the cancellation of the automatic 540-day extension that is allowed when somebody is extending their work authorization so that they can work while the adjudication is happening. That's no longer the case for certain categories. There's also a reduction in the approval of work authorizations from 5 years to 18 months for many of the categories eligible for work authorization. There have also been important changes for skilled foreign professionals, including the presidential proclamation issued on September of 2025 that imposed a $100,000 fee for certain H-1B filings. Now, there are a number of court challenges to the proclamation, but again, it's in effect right now, and we just have to wait and see. There are also policies prioritizing high wages that can limit the early career for the hiring of skilled workers, including the new H-1B weighted lottery selection process that prioritizes the selection of H-1B for those with the highest wages. The Department of Labor has also proposed a rule to raise the wage minimum for H-1B categories and individuals applying for labor certifications. That's the first step in the green card process, by an average of 25%. The Immigration Service may also soon take the step to restrict OPT or even eliminate it. For those of you who don't know, OPT is the optional practical training that students in the United States, foreign national students here, have the option of working for either 1 year or up to 3 years after they complete their education program. And the Immigration Service Director, Joseph Edlow, has expressed interest in removing the employment authorization options for students beyond the time that they are here for school. There is also a brand new final rule that has been submitted to the White House for executive clearance just this May 5th. And this rule is going to end the duration of status that is issued for students. So for the students that are coming here for programs like at CMU, at the University of Pittsburgh, when they come here, they are issued duration of stay, which means they can stay here while they are complying with their study program, and for either the 1 year or a total 3-year stay after they complete the program. Well, that seems like it's no longer going to be the case, the limitation is now going to be 4 years, so there's going to be a date limitation. And there will also be the requirement for them to apply for extensions to go beyond that if they need to. So between the wage-weighted H-1B lottery, the proposed increases to wage minimums, the expected restrictions on student employment categories like the OPT, we will likely see a limit to early career visa sponsorship for skilled foreign nationals. We've also seen increase in additional scrutiny and enhanced enforcement procedures around visiting foreign nationals, including B1 visa applicants for those coming from 50 designated countries who now have to provide and pay a bond of between $5,000 to $15,000 to come visit the United States. And if they are approved for visas, their visas are issued for 3 months with a maximum stay of 30 days and 1 entry only. There have also been a number of travel bans, including the expanded travel ban to the original June travel ban. And there are 2 basic categories, which is a full travel ban of 19 countries and individuals traveling with Palestinian authority-issued travel documents. And they are banned from receiving immigrant visas. Those are visas for people traveling here to live permanently in the United States, and non-immigrant visas. That means all the visas for temporary workers and temporary visitors and students. There's also a partial travel ban for another 20 countries, and that partial travel ban, again, limits the issuance of visas for immigrant visas. That's, again, people coming here to live permanently in the United States, and for certain temporary visas, including the visas issued to students and the visas issued to business visitors. In addition, nationals who are either have passports or have been born in one of these banned countries are also subject to the suspension of their pending applications for immigration benefits with the Immigration Service. And that includes all immigration benefits from work authorizations to green cards. That, of course, is just the tip of the iceberg, and I don't want to bore anybody else with the legal part of this, and that's not what we're here for today, right? But if there's one takeaway for all of you, it is that immigration benefit programs are facing increased scrutiny on multiple fronts. There's either full suspension of programs as well as restricted and or tougher requirements, increase enforcement activities, ICE raids, employment site investigations, to stricter vetting immigration and vetting at U.S. immigration and consulates. So what does that mean? What does that mean for us today? That is the big question and that we're going to have for our panelists today. So let's jump into today's discussion with that framework. And I am going to start with Rich Andre, Director of State and Local Initiatives at the American Immigration Council, and I think we already talked about all the great work that the council does. In addition to telling us a little bit more about your work with government, businesses, and nonprofit leaders in the United States, Rich, if you could also share with us what feedback you're receiving from them, and what they are saying are the overall effects of these changes in immigration policies.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay, well, thank you, Ana Maria, for the comprehensive but somewhat sobering kind of overview of where we are with immigration policy from a federal perspective. As she mentioned, my name is Rich. I think I'm the only non-Pittsburgher here, but really happy to be here. I came from New York this morning. Betty and I have worked for over a decade now on different projects, research reports, strategic planning, so always really love the opportunity to come back here. Just really quickly on the organization and my work in particular. So the American Immigration Council has been around almost as long as I've been alive, founded in the 80s by the American Immigration Lawyers Association to do research, advocacy, policy around immigration, really with the mission of reforming our immigration laws, both at the federal level, but also at the state and local level, to be more fair, more humane, and frankly, to take into consideration the major economic and demographic contributions that immigrants make at every level of government. My team was founded around 10 years ago, recognizing that the last time we tried to pass immigration reform in 2013, there was it was close, but we failed to do that, and there was a need to do more work at the state and local level with state and local government leaders, with the business community, with immigrant serving nonprofits to advance more welcoming policy. So that's kind of what we do. So to get into your question, Ana Maria, I guess I'll start and then you tell me if I should add more. But I think as I was reflecting about this question of kind of what is the impact of immigration policy today, what are we hearing from partners, I think that you gave a great overview of everything that's happening. For people who are in this world of immigration policy, it just feels like everything is on fire all the time, right? Every facet of immigration is under attack by this administration, and I think we kind of knew that was going to be the case, right? Donald Trump made immigration a centerpiece of not only his first term, but also this term. So no huge surprise there. I think the comprehensive nature of the way the immigration system is being gutted is maybe a little bit of a surprise. And there's a real impact to that. I will say, though, that the impact is not being felt universally, right? So I would almost describe it as there's an acute impact faced by some people, some places, some industries, and I think there's a more chronic impact that will eventually impact all of us, but that will be take longer to take hold and will be a little bit harder to discern as the direct result of immigration policy. So just to speak quickly to kind of some examples of both of those. So I think we're all aware there have been several high-profile immigration enforcement actions in major cities over the past several years. LA, Chicago, the Twin Cities, Charlotte, and the list goes on. I think one really important thing that we're seeing happen now is that some of those places are taking steps towards accountability, right? They are now emerging from maybe the worst of the enforcement to ask what actually happened here, what should we learn from this, and to create a public record. So the states of Illinois and Minnesota are both going through distinct, but I would say related accountability efforts to try to document what happened in their communities. And just to share some quick highlights. So Illinois, as a product of Operation Midway Blitz, produced a report on the impact. And one of the things that stuck out to me, it's a very long report, was they looked at one of the most immigrant-heavy commercial corridors, a place called Little Village. It's otherwise known as the Mexico of the Midwest, and did a bunch of surveying of business owners, and found that the impact of the enforcement was so extensive, both in terms of workers not showing up to work and consumers not shopping, that in that very important corridor, they saw sales decline by 40 to 70% during the enforcement action, and had business owners compare that to the impact of COVID. And actually that's been a theme that's coming up more and more as I was doing some research for this talk, is that the fear that is resulting from large-scale enforcement is equivalent to to a pandemic, just to put it in perspective. Should I stop there or keep going?
If you wouldn't mind, just
yeah, I'll pause there. I got more to share.
I'd like to come back to all of that.
Sure.
So thank you for that national perspective, because I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And as we take this to a more local perspective, we have Sara Innamorato, our Allegheny County Executive. Thank you for being here. Welcome. So please share with us your administration's plan for prioritizing economic development, and in particular, the role of immigrants in that plan.
Thank you for that question. And so, Sara Innamorato, Allegheny County Executive. I don't want to get deep into our economic development plans, but I do want to talk about the economic impact that immigrants have on our region and kind of what we've been facing locally. You know, we kind of got a national perspective of the chilling effect of immigration policy, and it's no different here in Allegheny County. You know, part of our growth strategy as a region is stabilizing and growing our population. And according to the last census that came out in 2020, but for foreign-born individuals, we would have lost population overall, but we did grow slightly here in Allegheny County. And we're already seeing through like community survey data that we are having fewer foreign-born individuals move to our region. So we are already, like, I think it went from 7,000 to about 3,000. So we still have more, but we're not going to grow. And that's going to have long-term economic ramifications, I think long beyond this administration and the way that they're handling immigration. You know, a lot of the data we have right now is very anecdotal. We're talking to immigrants who own Main Street businesses. The chilling effect is happening kind of across our region when there are immigrants being served primarily through these institutions, and you know, you're hearing about the decline of overall month-over-month sales. When people are scared to go outside, they pull their kids from school, they don't show up for work, they don't start businesses, and you know, we have to, you know, we rely on immigrants to support our manufacturing sector, to start businesses. Foreign-born individuals start businesses at higher rates than American-born individuals. So a lot of our entrepreneurship and that spirit of entrepreneurship that we're so proud of here in Allegheny County, a lot of that is fueled by immigrants and refugees. And we also have a tremendous amount of highly educated immigrants who are here, who are filling really critical roles, especially in our healthcare system. And so as we're seeing these trends at the federal level, it is impacting us here locally. It is shaking up our plans for growth and stability. The other key factor is, you know, we have a low unemployment rate here in Allegheny County, which is a good climate for workers. It's about 3.4%. National average is about a little over, I think, 4.3%. So we need talent, we need people, and if we are shutting off one of these valves of like foreign-born individuals, immigrants and refugees coming into our community, starting businesses, filling job openings, starting families, like it has long-term negative impact on our growth aspects. So we are deeply concerned about, you know, what's happening at the federal level, and we're doing a lot. We're doing what we can at the local level to try to still express that we are a welcoming county, that we are investing in our immigrant and refugee neighbors, but it's no substitute for you know, the fear that's being instilled in people by the erratic nature of the way that immigration policy is being rolled out at the federal level.
Thank you. Next, we have Gus Faucher. He is the Senior Vice President and Chief Economist at PNC Financial Services. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And as an economist who is intrinsically familiar with the trends in this region, in the long term, what are the effects of these restrictions on immigration populations for our region? The county executive said it's difficult now, but what are we going to start seeing in future trends?
So a couple of points. The first of which is that over the long run, there are only two ways an economy grows. You either have more workers or you have what we call productivity growth, output per worker. And historically in the United States, we have had both productivity growth and growth in the labor force. But with the restrictions on immigration that we're seeing, labor force growth has slowed dramatically, and in fact, when we look at the Pittsburgh metro area, so the Allegheny County and the surrounding counties, it's actually down by more than 30,000 from before the pandemic. We have 30,000 fewer people in the area who are either working or looking for work compared to where we were before the pandemic. And that was true even before we had these additional restrictions on immigration. I don't think certainly don't need to tell Sarah, but the demographics in Western Pennsylvania are just not good. I'll be blunt. There's what we call natural population growth, which is births minus deaths. We have an older population in the Pittsburgh metropolitan area, so we have more deaths every year than births, so we see natural population declining. Second factor is domestic net migration, and typically, not every year, but typically we see more native-born people move out of the Pittsburgh metro area than move into the Pittsburgh metro area, in part because we have an older population and people move for retirement purposes and so forth. And then you have international net migration, and that is generally positive for the Pittsburgh metro area, although we see less of a contribution to population growth in the Pittsburgh metro area than we do in the rest of the country. But we see the labor force declining in the area. We see the population declining in the area. It's been steadily declining for decades now at this point. And the problem is only going to get more severe with fewer immigrants coming to the United States. And so that's going to be a particular drag. You think about the Pittsburgh area. How did the Pittsburgh area become so prominent? Because at the turn of the last century, we had people coming from all over the world to work in the Pittsburgh steel mills. We had internal immigration. We had the Great Migration from the South. We had people coming from other parts of the country to work in Pittsburgh. Now, those factors have turned negative, and so it's going to be a substantial problem. If we see population declines, that means less demand for consumer services, less demand for housing, that type of thing. And then in terms of the types of industries that the Pittsburgh area has, if you think about what are our big industries, well, education. A lot of academics come from abroad. A lot of our students come from abroad, and so less demand for our educational services. Healthcare. As Sarah pointed out, many of our healthcare workers come from abroad, and so that's going to be a drag. Tech. Many of those tech startups, there are people who come to Pitt, they come to CMU, they get a degree, they stay in the Pittsburgh area, and they build businesses, and we're discouraging those people from coming to the area. So this is going to be a problem for the nation as a whole, but I think it's going to be a problem for Pittsburgh in particular, given our industrial makeup, given the importance that, given our weaker, kind of more internal demographics. And then also I want to point out one thing is, there's a concern everywhere, and this is true in Pittsburgh, it's true elsewhere, about a lack of affordable housing. Well, who tends to be the workers who put up those houses? A lot of it is immigrant labor. And so if we're concerned about housing affordability, we're discouraging the construction of homes because we're discouraging that workforce from locating in Pittsburgh in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Would either of you like to comment on that at all, or?
I guess I'll just add that, when I was talking before about chronic versus acute impacts. I mean, some of the industries you mentioned, healthcare, food services, construction, hospitality, like we're already hearing, not only here, but across the country, that's the canary in the coal mine, right? Those are industries that rely on immigrant labor that are feeling the pinch of a restricted workforce. But those have downstream effects. I think you raised a good one, right? You're trying to make this region more affordable and make housing more plenty. When construction is more expensive and harder to come by, there's an impact there. When it's harder to feed your family because grocery prices are increased, there's an impact there. So I think, we are at the beginning of what unfortunately will be a larger wave of economic and demographic impacts from the policies that are being implemented right now. And not to mention just shutting off the flow of international migration, but also, as you mentioned at the beginning, there is a removal of legal status and work authorization for folks who are already here. Betty and I were talking just before about this question of temporary protected status for Haitians, right? There's 350,000 Haitians across the country who have temporary protected status that was given first in 2010 after the earthquake that happened there. And really the criteria for removing this designation is that the conditions in the home country have ameliorated to the point where it's safe to go home. My parents are from Haiti. I can assure you that's not the case, right? But the administration's trying to do away with this policy anyways. And there are huge implications for communities like Charleroi, like Springfield, Ohio, ones that we've heard in the news, that Haitians play a huge role in revitalizing these communities, bringing population, bringing jobs, bringing a workforce. If and when that status just goes away, overnight, communities are going to really feel the pinch, and not just here, but I'm based in New York, Boston, Florida, so I think there's huge stakes here, and there's going to be short-term ways that we feel it and long-term ways that we feel it as well.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, too, to Gus's point, the individuals who are coming from abroad and moving to our region, those individuals tend to be younger demographically. So it does help our overall demographics when we're talking about being an older county. We also have to keep in mind that the majority of immigrants who have migrated here since 2010, 78% of them are not naturalized. So when we're talking about the erratic nature of how the federal government is, just stopping temporary protective status, ending refugee programs, limiting visas from certain countries, or removing and revoking visas, or choosing not to renew, that's the majority of the foreign-born individuals who are here. They could be impacted at any time. They could be living here stably, having businesses, employing people, having a family, their kids enrolled in school, and then every sense of security they had just ripped out from them. And that creates a terrible fear that has a ripple effect across our economy.
So advocates for these types of limiting policies often bring up, this increase in population, it's a pull on our resources, right? There's a cost to it. What do you say to somebody who brings these points up? What overall are the cost of the resources overall a net gain or a net loss when you consider the long-term effects and the long-term benefits?
There are certainly costs, and you look at the educational system, for example, and there are costs of schooling children of immigrants, and social services, although immigrants, tend to be less able to access those services, that kinds of thing. So there are definitely costs that are involved, but obviously, some of them are working under the table, but many of them are paying taxes. When I used to work at the Treasury Department, and undocumented workers, they tend to have Social Security numbers that are fake, but they actually don't collect the benefits. And so for Social Security, undocumented immigration is actually a net positive for the program. But as Sarah pointed out, they tend to be younger, so they're paying into these programs, but they're not getting Social Security, they're not getting Medicare. One of the open questions that we see is, housing affordability has been a big issue. And to the extent that we've had strong immigration growth, has that made it more difficult for people to find affordable housing? And, there's the evidence is mixed on that, and I think that that's an open question. But again, that being said, I think over the longer run, with the contributions of the immigrant workforce to construction, I think that probably when we look at it not just in a period of 3 or 4 years, but over the longer run, I think that it's probably a net positive because it allows for more growth in the housing stock that will help bring about greater affordability over the longer run.
I'll just add that so the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank, basically looked into this question of the cost benefit earlier this year, and I found the findings striking. So they basically looked at a 30-year period from 1994 to 2023 and looked at the fiscal impact of immigration at the federal, state, and local level across the country. And basically their conclusion was that over that 30-year period, immigrants paid more in taxes than they drew down in benefits. And the main reason is, well, 2 things. One, it's the profile of immigrants, that largely they come here already being of working age. They're more likely to be working age, as you said, than the US born overall, more likely to start a business. But also there's some real barriers to accessing federal benefits. And I think this is one of the myths around immigration that gets thrown around a lot, is that immigrants are a drain on Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. And in reality, you need to have been here with legal status and then wait 5 years after that to even start to tap into these programs. So the vast majority of immigrants are actually paying in without being able to benefit. And so I think when you kind of look in the aggregate, as this report did, it's a net benefit, not to mention so many of the kind of demographic impacts that we talked about before around population growth and the like. We did a report looking at the Great Lakes region, including this region, for about a 10-year period, and found that 80% of immigration, or 80% of population growth in the Great Lakes region over that time was due to immigrants. Right, so there's things that are almost, you can quantify it, but the real impact to the tax base and to services is almost hard to quantify because it's so comprehensive. And so just to share the kind of counter to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm personally appalled that that's the way that we've structured it, right? That we have immigrants who are paying into systems that are benefiting all of us, and they're not able to even draw down. If anything, we should be outraged by that. That we have people who are propping up these social safety nets, and they don't get to reap the rewards of that. From a local perspective, this is dated data at this point. It's about a decade old, but immigrants have contributed about over $125 million a year in state and local taxes. So it's not only about paying federal taxes, but it's also about the contribution that they make to the local and state coffers as well.
Right.
And sorry, one more point that I want to raise is that, again, if we restrict immigration, if we have fewer immigrants entering the workforce, and we see slower long-run economic growth in the United States, and that reduces our standing on the international stage. The stronger the U.S. economy is over the longer run, I think the more the more the United States is respected throughout the world. And so this seems to me to be a way of weakening the United States over the longer run rather than strengthening the United States.
Well, thank you all for your comments. I think at this point we want to open the questions up to the audience. So if anybody has any questions, please, sir.
So my question is, what immigration reform is desirable? What is possible? And can we expect at any time any legislative action with the changing composition in Congress? Is there anything there that we can expect?
Sorry, can he, because the first part I didn't
So
follow.
what immigration reform is desirable, what is possible, and when we can see something?
Well, in terms of immigration reform, I think we're seeing the tip of the iceberg in the changes that we're going to see, like we discussed earlier. Some of those are unfortunately going to look more restrictive for the next couple years. So that's what is probably expected. We're still not gone through all of the proposals, and I'm sure there are more coming. So yeah.
So my question is on the universities and in the region. Obviously, the international students pay full tuition versus the American students being financially subsidized. The major universities in the region, what is the effect on our local economy because of that? The other thing that I'm an immigrant myself, and the ongoing question for me is that my conservative friends always say, well, all these immigrants are taking the jobs of Americans. And my belief is that Americans won't do the jobs that immigrants will do. So two-part question. One, what are the universities, what can they do to increase international population? And the second thing is, what are we doing for the unemployed native-born Americans to take some of these jobs that are typically done by immigrants to motivate them to work?
So a couple of points there. So first of all, you may not think about it this way, but when foreign students come to the United States and enroll in our schools, that's actually a United States export. It's an export of services. So by restricting that we're actually weighing on our exports. And that's not how people typically think of that, but certainly that's one impact of this. And then it's not just the direct tuition payments, but it's all the other things that our students are buying. So the restaurants, the food that they buy in the Pittsburgh area and so forth. And so by restricting student immigration in particular, that's a drag. And then also, as we pointed out, many of those students, they want to stay in the United States. They've come to our world-class institutions to get this education, and then we encourage them to take those skills somewhere else when they would much rather stay here in the United States and contribute to our economy. And I think that gets into your second point, which is, people, if immigrants come to the United States and work, they spend. They buy goods and services within the United States, and that creates opportunities for native-born Americans in jobs and so forth. So it's not that there's only so much labor that we need in the economy, but if we have more workers, that creates more demand in the economy, and that in turn creates more job opportunities for everybody, for immigrants and native-born Americans as well. And then I'm trying to remember what the other question, the other part of the question you asked about, Robin. Oh yeah, when we look at the unemployment rate for native-born Americans, it's actually quite low. And in fact, we have, since the pandemic, we've created more jobs in the United States than basically job growth. All of the job growth that we've seen since the pandemic, it's come because we've had more immigrants coming to the United States. That the number of native-born Americans now is larger than it was before the pandemic, even when you take into account the impact of immigrants. So they are creating jobs, they're creating opportunities for native-born Americans as well. So it's not a zero-sum game where if an immigrant gets a job, that means that a native-born American doesn't get that job. It's if I get a job, that creates opportunities for immigrants. If an immigrant gets a job, that creates opportunities for native-born Americans. And again, that's the only way, not the only way, but that's one of the chief ways we're going to grow the economy over the longer run.
So I'm very happy that we have the county here, not the city, because I think when it comes to immigration, underrated aspect is that the majority of technical class immigrants, like professors and doctors, they don't move to the city. They move to the ethnoburbs. They come to Monroeville or Carnegie or Penn Hills or especially Wexford. And what this leads to is necessity for intergovernmental cooperation. And I have to ask, because these ethnoburbs are predominantly white, and because they also have a variety of incomes and a variety of histories, what are the challenges as well as what are the successes you've seen in working with these boroughs and townships that are not called Pittsburgh in trying to create more opportunities for immigration and immigrant success and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we work very closely with the city, but to your point, we have foreign-born individuals who live all over this county, and we've really put an emphasis on talking about being a welcoming Allegheny County, talking about the positive impact of immigrants, especially in this time of very heated political rhetoric. Is just really level setting with people on the data that exists. I believe that for the most part, Pittsburghers and people who live in Allegheny County really love their neighbors, regardless of where they came from. But it really is, a tremendous amount of work, and we've incorporated some policies that we're doing at a county level to kind of show what local governments can be doing. So, for example, we have a non-cooperation policy with ICE. So we allow federal officers to do what they do, our county police do what they do. We've really discouraged local municipalities from, enacting those, what are those? 287G agreements. I believe we only have one or two municipalities out of 130 that have those agreements in place. So we heavily discourage that. A lot of education with our local police chiefs association, talking about the liability that municipalities open themselves up to if they do have those types of agreements on the books. We've done a tremendous amount to do translation for the different services that we offer, economic development opportunities that we have. So working with groups that work with different pockets of immigrants to say, here are the programs you can access to start your business or grow your business. So really have been working kind of all the angles. And then, we meet pretty regularly with our immigrant and refugee serving groups to get constant feedback. So that has led to that, the non-cooperation agreement with ICE, our non-cooperation agreement policies that we've instilled across the county. We've done training for our frontline employees, so not just police, but CYF caseworkers, public defenders, people who deal with the public on de-escalation training, ABLE training, which is how you intervene if you see a law enforcement officer violating someone's rights. And we've actually staffed up in our public defender's office because just to kind of level set with the human impact, our public defenders can't represent anyone in federal court or out of the jurisdiction of Allegheny County, but we get so many questions from parents who, it makes me very upset to think about, but parents who have to think about how to designate their authority if they would get picked up while their kids are at school. Sorry. It's really sad to think about that you have to live your life knowing that your kids might come home to an empty house. So that's the work. That's the human element. That's the human work that we're trying to do at the county, and it's no substitute for really comprehensive immigration work that needs to happen at the federal level. But we are doing the work. We're encouraging municipalities to do what they can. We work in hand with the city to just reassure people that we want you here. We are going to support you economically. We are going to support you as a neighbor because we love you, and we also know the contributions that you make.
And sorry, let me just raise one other point, which is it's not just an Allegheny County issue. You look at the broader Pittsburgh metropolitan area, and I was just looking at growth on or population changes across the municipalities. We are seeing growth in some parts of the metro area, primarily along the I-79 corridor. But you look at some of the outlying counties, Fayette County, Lawrence County, and so forth, Uniontown, they're experiencing the largest population declines. And so they're going to be hit even harder by these immigration restrictions that we're seeing.
Rich, I took your mic, so if you want to use anyone else's if you want to weigh in.
Earlier, County Executive Innamorato stated, if I heard right, that 78% of immigrants in the region are not naturalized. That feels really high. Could we provide some context to that number? Is that normal for metropolitan areas of this size? Are those folks on a path to citizenship? Are they students temporarily living? Like, could we just talk a little about the lived experience that number is describing?
Sure. So I can't necessarily speak to the local, but I would say that seems high. About half of immigrants are naturalized across the country. So 78% seems high. And actually from that, I hear an opportunity, right, to both educate folks on the benefits of citizenship. Actually, in a former job when I worked in New York City government, I ran a citizenship program through our public library system where we provided free legal support to folks who wanted to naturalize. And half the battle was just educating folks on who are green card holders and otherwise eligible, what is the value of taking the next step? And there's plenty, right? You qualify for different jobs that have citizenship restrictions. It's a more ironclad protection from deportation, though that's being challenged right now with the denaturalization effort of this administration. But in theory, that's a stronger protection from deportation. We've seen that nationally your income goes up when you become a citizen. But there's real barriers, right? You have to pay a fee, and that's actually one thing we haven't really touched on as a way this administration is targeting immigration on the legal side is actually just increasing the fee. So you talked about H-1B, but across the board, making it more inaccessible for working class or not even working class immigrants to just adjust their status if they're eligible. So with your comment actually here, just an opportunity to invest in more naturalization education, educate folks on the fact that there's a fee waiver if you qualify based on income, and hopefully get folks to take that next step if they want to kind of take that final step and become a citizen. And happy to talk about different models from New York and elsewhere that have been successful. But ultimately, that's the goal, right? If we're talking about immigrant integration and inclusion, again, for those who decide that that's the step for them, full integration is becoming a U.S. citizen, and so we want to see that where possible.
And the context of that comes from our Department of Economic Development, and that is just individuals who've moved here since 2010. So, sometimes it takes several decades for a person to fully naturalize as a U.S. citizen. I'm sure it's skewed heavily because of students, and we just have a number of individuals who are there. So that would be my theory behind why we're a little higher, is this because it's only the past 16 years and because of our high concentration of foreign-born students that are here.
I have a question. So let's fast forward to November 2028, and let's say there's an election that will happen, and there's a party shift. Ana Maria, so what's the time frame by which we can undo some of these things?
Well, actually, that's a great question, and I think it depends on, we have to get back to the history of executive orders, right? And executive orders, actually, the Obama administration started with that. And it was quickly picked up by the first Trump administration, and then implemented. Biden had his own executive orders, which as soon as this administration came in, some of the first executive orders that they had was to undo some of the previous ones. So I think that as long as that mechanism is in place, and we don't know for how long it will be, but there's, it's still heavily used, I think that a lot of these policies can be undone, right? Because many of them have come up as policy changes or changes through executive orders and not through the complete legislative process. I can give you a good example. The Biden administration implemented and actually codified a number of rules for H-1Bs, and also, for instance, for providing previously approved visas recognition and ensuring that they receive the same treatment if you file for an extension. And that was all codified, and in order to undo that, it has definitely been very difficult by the current administration. So they are going through the process, but they have to go through a legislative process to undo the deference. And so even though they have found other ways to go around it, there's still that rule that says that as long as you have received an approval, right, the current adjudicator who's looking at it as an extension that's based on the same facts should approve it, because there's that codified deference to your previous approval. So that is what kind of illustrates the difference of you're making changes through executive orders as opposed to you're making changes through the legislator. And so as long as they are policies that are either policies or coming through executive orders, I think there is a good chance that things can turn around fairly quick. If things are implemented through our normal legislative process, it does take a very long time.
I guess I would just add, I agree with that, for sure. I think maybe one of the areas where you'd see a market shift, and we saw this from Trump 1 to Biden, is around enforcement, right? ICE and CBP are part of the Department of Homeland Security. The DHS secretary answers to the president. And so one thing that, I think to illustrate that almost every previous administration has had kind of enforcement priorities, right? So people who are designated a public threat, or people who have crossed the border recently, et cetera. President Trump has decided to basically get rid of those enforcement priorities. And what does that mean? When there are no priorities, everyone's a priority. And I think you've seen in places like the Twin Cities and Chicago and LA, these mass enforcement operations where they're picking up anyone and everyone, including US citizens. I think that's a product of the decision to affirmatively not have priorities. I do think, and this goes back to your question, I wanted to get back to it around, there is plenty, and we've seen now plenty that the president can do, but ultimately the job of reforming our immigration laws is the job of Congress, and Congress has failed to do that now for several decades, right? And so that onus is still on Congress to find some grand bargain that addresses so much of what needs to be addressed, right? We have 12 to 13 million undocumented immigrants, many of whom are long-term residents that have really no way to get right by the law. You have a border system that needs reform. You have a visa system that needs reform. You have employer needs that are not being met. And there are some proposals out there. There's the Dignity Act, which is a bipartisan bill that's come out of the House. Actually, we put together just this last week, American Immigration Council put together kind of a framework for what interior enforcement could look like in maybe a future administration, one that is more humane, more fair, more proportional, so that someone who is a certified public safety threat is not treated the same as the abuelita who's selling tamales in the New York City subway. Right now there's such a blurred line because of the laws we have on the books. And so for sure, I think there's a lot that a future administration, Democrat or Republican, can and should do to walk back some of the real atrocities that we've seen, but it doesn't. Doing just that does not solve for the decades of inaction and a completely broken, outdated immigration system that also needs reform, and only Congress can do that.
And let me just add, I think that there's room for compromise, but I think it's in the advantage of both political parties, to be honest with you, to not solve the problem, because then that gives them a campaign issue. So even if they're, I do think, you can certainly think of lots of ways and, improvements to the employer-based system and so forth, but there are incentives to actually not solve the problem from a political standpoint.
And I think we also have to think about why this is the issue that the Trump administration has picked up and ran with. Because people who have, called themselves Americans for generations are looking around and they're not seeing opportunity. They're not seeing investment. They're not getting jobs. They're not getting paid well. They're seeing the social safety net get slashed. And what's happening is that politicians are pointing at immigrants and saying, well, it's not our fault. It's not that we've cut social safety nets. It's not that we've divested in robust, inclusive economic development tools. It's that these immigrants have come in and taken your jobs and taken away opportunity. And so, I do believe that we have a tremendous amount of policy work to do at the federal level, but I also think that there's this healing of America that needs to happen, that can help prevent this from happening again and have cooler heads prevail and actually come up with a comprehensive, compassionate approach to immigration.
I agree with you, County Executive. We need that compassion. So maybe we can go out there, because you're preaching to the choir here. We're all with you guys on that. And every study knows and shows that immigrants have added to the jobs, not taken away the jobs. And it's good for the bottom line. I'm a Chamber of Commerce president. So I know that diversity, immigration helps the bottom line. How do we get the message across to the other side? Or are they doing it purposely, as you said, to create politics and, take away the votes? How do we get it across to the people?
I think education and things like this are absolutely very important, but I want to also go back to something that Gus said. And you said it's not a zero-sum game. And I think changing that perspective is a key part of making sure that people understand we are trying to grow the economy. We are trying to grow the pie. The pie is not a limited resource where if immigrants are taking one portion, then there's less of a portion for native-born individuals. It is not. We are trying to increase that size, and this is not a zero sum. And I think that's the most important takeaway. And I love that you put it in that perspective because I think it's important.
And I think the history of Pittsburgh proves that, and I think we are we are poised to make that case better than most parts of the country because of all the immigrants that came to the Pittsburgh area and built this economy, 100 and 125 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. My question related to the skills. So, if we look at economic development perspective of the Pittsburgh, so what kind of skills Pittsburgh economy is needed, and can these skills be filled by domestic immigration?
I mean, we need everybody, right? We need workers with less formal education, in industries like construction and in service industries, retail, food service, accommodations, that type of things. We need people in, skilled trade workers. We need tech workers. We need highly skilled. We need nurses. We need physicians. We need medical assistants. So, for Pittsburgh, the answer is easy. We need everybody that we can get, and we should be, happy to welcome anyone who wants to come to the Pittsburgh area. In terms of thinking about it over the longer run, I think that that's a political issue, and I think that our policymakers should help do that. And I think Congress, can take a look and say, do we have more concerns about a lack of low-wage workers? Think about food industries like agriculture, not important for Western Pennsylvania, but that's very hard work, and it tends to be immigrants who do that work in California, the Central Valley, or in Florida, the citrus growing, that kind of thing. But we also want skilled labor. We want entrepreneurs. So I think that that's kind of a policy decision. But for Pittsburgh, I think the answer is is easy. We need everybody who wants to come here.
I have a question over here. I really hate to bring up AI because, frankly, I'm so sick of hearing about it and I'm wary of it. But one sort of argument for AI is that it will increase productivity per worker. And so is there any fear that maybe that growth might mask some of these long-term losses from the lack of immigrant contributions to this country? And frankly, I also worry that it might stoke more job anxiety. And I'm curious how you think that might play out in the next election.
I guess that's meant for me. This is something that I'm thinking about every day in my job. And to some extent, I think you're right. We have, when we look at our forecast for long-run economic growth in the United States, normally if we saw lower levels of immigration, we would say, oh, well, we expect to see weaker long-run economic growth. To some extent, that's going to be offset by stronger, what we call productivity growth. Each worker, on average, produces more, and so that allows for stronger economic growth. Now, it's not either or. We can still have stronger productivity growth from AI and stronger economic growth from more people in the labor force. So it's not that we can't have one, but we can't have the other, and we would have a stronger economy if we had both of those. I am very concerned about the distributional implications of AI. You think about what's happened in our political system over the last 30 or 40 years, and again, Pittsburgh is a great example of this. Globalization, I think, on net has benefited the U.S. economy, it's benefited the global economy, but it has caused enormous disruptions in our political system, and that's the reason why the Pittsburgh labor force is smaller than it was decades ago because of the collapse of the steel industry and so forth. And I'm very concerned that the distributional implications of AI could be even larger than the distributional implications of globalization. So I think we need to be thinking about all of these issues now. How do we make sure that people have access to retraining, to education, to health care, to income support, all of those kinds of things? Because I'm concerned that while AI could hold tremendous benefits for the economy, I'm very concerned, particularly in our current fragile political state, that the distributional implications could cause even more disruptions, and as if things haven't been bad enough over the last 25 years, the potential for those even greater disruptions. Sorry, that came across as very pessimistic.
So I have a couple comments. One is, I think you said it right, it's been over 50 years that the legislature in the United States has dealt with immigration. When I came to the United States in 1967, it took 10 months to get legal status to come here. Today, it's 8 to 10 years, and the only people that can fix that is Congress. So one question is, what can we do in Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania to motivate our legislators on the national level to finally deal with this issue? The second thing is that it's a PR thing. We have some tremendous entrepreneurs in Pittsburgh that are foreign-born. One that comes to mind right away because it's been in the news lately is Duolingo. Can we do more positive news on immigrants that have made tremendous progress in our economy that are not naturally born? And we always hear the bad stuff. This immigrant killed this person, blah, blah, blah. We have more natural born Americans that are killing people than immigrants. So 2 questions. One is, what can we do from a legislative standpoint? And 2, from a PR standpoint, to highlight the immigrants that are doing the tremendous economic development in the region?
So I'm happy to start. I guess, thank you for the question, first of all. I think on the what can you do to compel Congress to act, I mean, it sounds so cliche, but you need to talk to them, right? You need to call your representatives, see them in person if possible, go to their offices, whether in district or in DC. You spoke up in the back from the Asian chamber. when we talk to folks on the Hill, they're always asking for perspectives that are in addition to the immigrants' rights groups and the directly affected. They want to hear from business. They want to hear from corporations who are struggling to meet their bottom line or struggling to find workers, or they want a full picture of the impact. And so to the extent that the folks in this room, I imagine by default you're pretty well connected, compelling folks who are not usually at the table talking about these issues to come to the table, talk about these issues, especially with their elected officials. So I think that's one. On your second point, 100%. I mean, we traffic a lot in data, and I think data is incredibly important. We've thrown a bunch of stats at you this evening, but in the decade plus that I've been doing this work, one story can go much farther than a bunch of stats, right? And so what we try to do is couple the data that we put out on a given place with stories of immigrants from that place to kind of humanize it, give it a heartbeat, because I think that's what stays with people. I think there's so much opportunity right now. We're all addicted to our phones and a short form video to show what the real impact is of people, their families, the businesses they're starting, and that can be the CEO, right, of Duolingo, but also the immigrant small business that is vital to a given neighborhood. So, none of this is easy. It takes time to change hearts and minds for sure, but I think you need to couple both those things, right? It's the data and the stories together.
If you know someone who wants to fund that PR campaign, we're all in. But we have been trying to do place positive news stories. So we worked with the local news and did one around the positive economic impact on immigrant-owned businesses and just kind of what people are facing here today. And it was the human story, the human narrative. And we hope that people watched it and their hearts and minds were changed.
And I will tell you, and I deal with policymakers on both sides of the aisle. They understand this. They know this. It's just the political incentives aren't there. That they have their business constituents come to them and they complain about not having enough workers, but the way to get votes is to create conflict, and so it's a matter. Again, I think there is a bipartisan consensus out there. It's a matter of changing the political incentives so that people aren't encouraged to stoke those divisions.
All right, thanks very much. And it seems like Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania, Allegheny County is like we've had this for years, and it's a place to where you can tell that story about social cohesion coming together. But my question, County Executive, you mentioned like the amount that immigrants contribute to not just the economy and the tax base, and I think that we probably all share the sentiment that it's a great inequity that people that are paying into those systems are not benefiting from it, and at the county and federal or state level, it's not exactly apples to apples, but the county has been quite innovative and forward-leaning in policy, and I think about the parental leave work that you're doing now, and thank you for that. Are there other innovative policies to address some of those inequities that the county could look at or that are being done elsewhere in the country?
That's a great suggestion. We will look into it. I mean, we have really been trying to, deploy best practices in, just kind of this tumultuous time, and really thinking about how we can, just have two-way dialogue with our immigrant and refugee serving organizations. I will say it is much harder to get actual immigrants and refugees to sit down and talk to government right now. There is just an innate fear, regardless of what level of government, but they will speak through trusted individuals, trusted organizations. So, it's that two-way dialogue, and we have been doing a lot internally that's like, a little can be unglamorous, but is really helpful to those organizations and the individuals that they serve right now. And that's everything from staffing up our public defender's office, so to answer those legal questions, creating pots of money within our Department of Human Services to support families who've had an individual in their family deported or detained and have in turn lost revenue in personal family income that's been coming in. There's just a number of other ways that we've just tried to be responsive to the needs of our community in this moment. Do you have any suggestions on best practices?
I think there's plenty, and it's always hard to, like you're saying, compare apples to apples. What the profile of Allegheny County based on your budget and things. But I think a lot of the best practices are things that you actually name. So I think there's things like non-cooperation with ICE, which y'all have. Investments in legal services is a huge one. I think coupled with that is know your rights. Bystander education I think is really important. One of the, to use your term, unglamorous but very important is language access, which obviously in a moment like this, there's the acute need around emergencies and do people get information in a language that they feel most comfortable around things like ICE enforcement, but also natural disasters. So I think there's a lot that you guys are doing, and I'd be happy to connect and figure out what else you can do. But I love the intention of you've done some and you want to do more. I think the leadership that you're showing is really giving me hope right now. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
I will also say when the first Trump executive order came out and he ended all support for refugee resettlement, we called the 3 major organizations that work with resettling refugees here in our region, and really we only give 90 days of support to these families. So if you think about having to leave probably a very volatile situation in your home country, settle in a land that you have no connections to, get an apartment, get a job, find some sustaining form of revenue. 90 days is not learn a language is not a whole lot of time. So we don't offer a lot of support from the federal perspective, but so they cut that off. And we talked to the refugee groups and we said, how much money is it? How many families do you have? How much money is it just to complete the promise that America made to these individuals? And it was roughly $700,000 to help these families. And we said, okay, I think we can find that money. So the county worked with philanthropy. I think the city threw in some money as well, and we were able to support these families. And it was so little, but it was just a token of goodwill and saying we made you a promise, and there is still so much tremendous promise of America, and we want you to believe in it as much as we believe it can still be a country that we are proud of.
All right. Well, first of all, this is a really terrific panel, so I want to thank the panelists. I had sort of two questions, one of which sort of goes to even before this administration, people who, like myself, who advocate for immigrants and people who advocate against immigrants, we were in agreement in the sense that the current system is broken. It's not working. But it was a product of an amazing reform in the 1960s, right, that changed the immigration law in a dramatic way at 65, and that allowed people to come here who had never been allowed to come here in big numbers previously, right? So that demographic change, we're living with it. I think it's a beautiful change, but obviously there's backlash to it, and that's some of what we're going through now. So I want to talk about what would be a good immigration system or policy, or who is it that you think is doing it better than the United States? And I'll tell you my fear is, because I do think this administration, for example, we haven't talked much about the agricultural sector at all, but this administration wants more immigrants working in the agricultural sector. They're allowing more of them to come, but they come as seasonal temporary workers, and this is my fear. That's where we're going to ultimately end up, is with expanded guest worker programs as a way of addressing the real needs that these immigrant workers fulfill, right? And that's as horrible as things are right now. That would be even more horrible, in my opinion, because now we'll have established sort of this underclass of workers in our country who have limited ability, certainly no voice within any local government, even much more restricted than undocumented workers in terms of being held captive by an employer. There's just never, in my opinion, there's just never been a guest worker program that wasn't a horror show. So I'm just asking the panel, do you think any other countries are doing this right? And can you help me maybe not panic over this fear of guest worker programs? Because I really do think that that's the direction ultimately that this administration is going to take us to.
I don't want to get into the guest worker aspect of it, but I do, Canada's system, which is primarily skills-based, I think that would be a good place to start with and look at what they're doing well, what they're doing not doing well. But I think overall that the Canadian system has helped fulfill some of their labor force concerns.
I'm in county government, so.
I would just say, and I don't, there is no ideal system, right? Because the type of migration that Canada is receiving is completely different, even than we are, and we are in the same, North American region. So we have to understand what our needs are and design a path that addresses the needs, not the political whims. And I think that the key is there. And as I think, and I hope, that as things move and we all start realizing, right, there's the dairy farmers, the people in agriculture, they are all realizing, hey, maybe we do need this, right? We do need this labor force. And so this change hopefully woke up a spark in a way of identifying what it is that we really do need and benefit from immigration that will allow us to hopefully create a reform that addresses our needs and not our political whims.
We are close to time, very close. So I'm going to do a lightning rod. We have 3 questions on this side. I'm going to give you the mic. All 3 ask your questions. Panel, remember the questions, and then we'll close it out that way.
Hi, I work with immigrants at the public defender, and it's clear to us, and I think now to everyone, that strict immigration policies disincentivize working with strict immigration policies disincentivize working with the government or approaching it, working under the table, et cetera. What does informed policy making look like for a population that's being made to keep itself very invisible or avoid working with the government?
I actually had a comment that one of the things I would immediately drop is the 3 and 10-year bans because data-wise, that's been shown that, and basically what those bans are is anybody that's been here undocumented consecutively for 6 months or a year or more, there's a 10-year ban if you leave the country. That disrupted natural workflows where Mexicans and other individuals would come here, work a little bit, and go back. And also I would get rid of the skewing, class-based skewing. Lower income people take longer to get their green card. They have to go through a process called labor certification, et cetera. Wealthier people, executives and managers, get to skip that process. I deal with them all the time, so thank you.
Thank you.
This is more of an observation. Thank you, Gus, for talking about the immigration insecurities and how the immigration is kind of slowing down the immigration population. One thing that I noticed is talking with some of my community, younger generation members. When I left India 26 years ago, they said that there is a brain drain that I'm contributing to India. With these policies, I see more of brain drain from America back to India, and I heard that acknowledgement. The sad part is, when I spoke to some of the policies are impacting some of the next generation in our communities. Some were led into some unwanted, seniors of high school students were led to some unwanted suicide thoughts, and some incidents have occurred. That's one thing. And the second aspect is when I talk to some seniors of our communities, they say that, hey, where did you apply? For the last 20 years, I've heard, hey, I applied to Carnegie Mellon, I applied to Penn State. Now I'm starting to hear I'm applying for schools in India, I'm applying for schools in Germany, and I'm like, what is this happening? That's my just observation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for participating. It has been my honor to share the panel with our distinguished guests, and of course to have all of your questions. There is the gentleman.
No, the first question in the back that was asked.
I'm sorry, and I was going to say, pardon me, I forgot. Was there a? I didn't hear.
There was a question.
If he can repeat it.
I don't know if anybody else on the panel heard it. You'll close this out.
What does informed policymaking look like when the population you're making policy about is being told to keep itself invisible?
What does informed policymaking
look like when the population is being told to stay invisible, the one that you're trying to make
Oh,
policy
I see.
about?
I see.
Yeah,
I
they
see.
don't talk to
I
the
think
census.
Yeah.
So I can speak just to what we're doing at the county, which is working with a roundtable of individuals that are immigrant and refugee leaders and serving organizations. So many folks are around that table are immigrants or refugees themselves. Many are not, but work and have built a tremendous amount of trust in that community. And so we look at the trusted leaders of those communities and work with them and have them kind of bring us concerns. And when that community feels comfortable having direct conversations with us, we do everything that we can to have a space that's like, safe for them, where we can have off-the-record conversations, where we can make sure that the folks who are in the room it's highly curated. So a lot of that does happen, and because of the very nature of people fearing for themselves and the safety of their family, we don't advertise that work because for obvious reasons. So, I think it's just that constant two-way dialogue with that group of individuals who are on the ground working with these families each and every day.
Yeah, I would say too that make sure that we are in contact with their advocates, right? Which is what you're with the grassroots communities that are responsible for advocating for them, because they are the best voice. And I know that we have a number of pro bono programs in pro bono coalitions where the goal is simply to understand what the populations that those organizations serve want and need, so that that can be communicated to the policymakers. So that's also a very important part.
If I could encourage everyone to thank our panel. Thank you, Ana Maria, for facilitating, Gus, County Executive, Rich. Thank you, Encore, for your welcome. Thank you all for being here, your time and attention, and wonderful questions. I feel like we could go on, but we got to wrap it up. Join us. Next month, we'll be back together for a conversation on trade and tariffs. We know the destabilization of economies, whatever your perspective might be, in the shakeup the tariffs is creates a challenge to preserving democracy and where we are. We'll also be hosting a global community bike ride, and we have a lot of other events coming up throughout the year. So thank you for being here and stick with us. Thank you again.